I calmly folded the dish towel I was holding and smiled at my 32-year-old son Marcus as he explained why I needed to move to the basement of my own home. What he didn't know was that in exactly 6 weeks, he'd be moving out of my house forever, because I was about to sell it to his ex-girlfriend Jessica for half its market value, with a leaseback clause that would make his life very, very interesting. Before we dive into this incredible story of family respect and justice, served ice cold, make sure to hit that like button, drop a comment, telling me what the most disrespectful thing a family member has ever said to you was, and subscribe because you're going to want to see how this plays out. Trust me, this story will restore your faith that sometimes good people do get the last laugh. My name is Margaret Thompson. I'm 70 years old, and this story begins 2 years ago when my world shifted in ways I never could have anticipated. For 48 years, I had been married to Robert Thompson, a dedicated high school principal who spent his career shaping young minds while I worked as the head librarian at our town's main branch. We lived a quiet, meaningful life in the beautiful Victorian home we'd purchased in 1978 in the historic district of Millbrook, Connecticut. But let me be absolutely clear about something from the start. I wasn't just Robert's wife or Marcus's mother. I was a woman with my own accomplishments, my own mind, and my own carefully cultivated expertise that most people, including my own son, never bothered to understand or appreciate. I held a master's degree in library science from Columbia University, graduating summa cum laude in 1976. For 35 years, I managed a staff of 12 librarians at the Millbrook Public Library, transforming it from a dusty repository of outdated books into a vibrant community center that served over 25,000 residents. I personally oversaw the complete digitization of our historical archives, securing federal grants totaling $400,000 to preserve centuries of local history. I spoke fluent Spanish and French, had traveled extensively throughout Europe during our summer breaks, and had been quietly managing our family's investments with a level of financial acumen that would have impressed most professional advisors. During my library career, I had developed relationships with book dealers, antiquarian collectors, and literary societies across New England. I understood the value of rare books, historical documents, and period furnishings in ways that extended far beyond sentimental attachment. I knew how to research provenance, authenticate historical items, and navigate the complex world of estate, sales, and auction houses. These skills would prove more valuable than anyone could have imagined. Our home wasn't just any house. It was a meticulously restored 1892 Queen Anne Victorian that Robert and I had spent 26 years bringing back to its original glory. We hadn't just bought a house. We had rescued a piece of architectural history and transformed it into a showcase that was regularly featured in Connecticut's historic home tours. The house sat on a corner lot in Millbrook's most prestigious neighborhood, surrounded by mature oak trees and featuring the original wraparound porch with intricate gingerbread trim. Inside, we had restored every detail to period authenticity. The original heart pine floors that we'd spent months refinishing by hand. The hand-painted William Morris wallpaper in the dining room that cost us $200 per roll. The restored stained glass windows that filtered rainbow light across the main staircase. The first floor featured a grand foyer with a curved staircase, a formal living room with a marble fireplace, a dining room that could seat 12, a modern kitchen with period-appropriate fixtures, and my pride and joy, a library with floor-to-ceiling built-in bookshelves that housed over 3,000 volumes, including several first editions and rare manuscripts I had acquired through my professional connections. The second floor had 4 bedrooms, including the master suite with its own sitting area and marble bathroom, plus 2 full bathrooms with original clawfoot tubs. The third floor, originally servants' quarters, had been converted into a spacious office and guest suite. Even the basement was finished, with a recreation room, full bathroom, and extensive storage areas. But here's what made this house truly special. Every renovation, every improvement, every piece of furniture and artwork had been carefully chosen, and paid for by Robert and me over nearly 3 decades. We had invested not just our money, but our hearts, our weekends, our vacation time, and our shared vision into creating something beautiful and lasting. More importantly, this house was entirely mine. When Robert passed away 3 years ago after a brief but aggressive battle with pancreatic cancer, he left everything to me in his will without any complications or conditions. The house, our investment portfolio, his teacher's pension, our life insurance policies, all of it became mine to manage as I saw fit. This wasn't an accident or oversight. Robert and I had discussed our estate planning thoroughly with our attorney, Harold Brennan, who had been our friend for over 20 years. Robert insisted that everything go to me because, as he put it, Margaret has been the financial brains of this operation since day one. She'll know exactly what to do with everything we've built together. He was right. I had been the one managing our finances for the last 20 years of our marriage. While Robert focused on his administrative duties at the high school, I had been researching investments, managing our retirement accounts, and making the financial decisions that allowed us to live comfortably while building substantial wealth. The time Robert died, our net worth was approximately $2.3 million. The house was worth $850,000. We had $900,000 in various investment accounts, $400,000 in Robert's pension fund, and $150,000 in life insurance proceeds. We also owned a small rental property in town worth $180,000 that provided steady monthly income. I mention these numbers not to boast, but to establish something important. I was not a poor widow dependent on her son's charity. I was a financially secure, property-owning woman who had spent decades making smart decisions about money and investments. Marcus was our only child, born when I was 38 and Robert was 40. We had tried for years to have children, enduring 3 miscarriages and countless disappointments before Marcus finally arrived. When he did, we poured all our love, attention, and hopes into raising him. Perhaps we poured too much. In retrospect, I can see that we may have shielded Marcus from too many of life's harsh realities, given him too many advantages without requiring enough responsibility in return. But at the time, we were just parents who wanted to give their only child every opportunity to succeed. Marcus was undeniably brilliant. He excelled academically from elementary school through high school, graduating as valedictorian with a perfect SAT score. He received a full scholarship to Yale University, where he studied economics and graduated summa cum laude. During college, he interned at prestigious financial firms and seemed destined for great success. But somewhere during those formative years, particularly during his time at Yale, Marcus developed an attitude that troubled both Robert and me. He began to view success purely in terms of money and status, dismissing careers that involved public service or social contribution as settling for less. He spoke about his classmates who chose teaching, social work, or nonprofit careers with a condescension that made me uncomfortable. "Mom, you don't understand how competitive the world is now," he would say when I expressed concern about his increasingly materialistic worldview. "Nice ideals don't pay for nice things. If you want to have real influence and security, you need to prioritize financial success above everything else." After graduation, Marcus moved to New York City to work at Pemberton and Associates, a mid-tier investment firm. For several years, he seemed to be building a successful independent life. He had a decent salary, a nice apartment in Brooklyn Heights, and was quickly promoted to senior analyst. Most importantly, he had a serious relationship with Jessica Chen, a pediatric nurse who worked at Mount Sinai Hospital. I loved Jessica from the moment Marcus brought her home to meet us. She was 28 years old, born to Chinese immigrant parents who had built a successful restaurant business in Queens. Jessica had worked her way through nursing school while helping her family with their restaurant, and she chose pediatric nursing because she genuinely wanted to help sick children and their families navigate medical crises. Jessica was intelligent, warm, and remarkably thoughtful. During their visits to Millbrook, she would spend hours in my library, genuinely interested in my book recommendations and fascinated by the stories I'd tell about my career and the historical research I'd done for various community projects. She asked thoughtful questions about Robert's work in education and seemed to understand that there were many ways to measure a successful life beyond income and status symbols. What impressed me most about Jessica was her respectful curiosity about our family history and traditions. She would help me prepare elaborate Sunday dinners, asking for recipes and cooking techniques that had been passed down through generations. She showed genuine interest in the antique furniture and artwork Robert and I had collected, wanting to understand the stories behind each piece. Jessica also understood financial responsibility in ways that surprised me. Despite earning a nurse's salary, she had managed to save money, pay off her student loans ahead of schedule, and even help her parents with some restaurant improvements. She talked about money realistically and responsibly, without either obsessing over it or dismissing its importance. During the 3 years she and Marcus dated, Jessica and I developed a relationship that felt genuinely meaningful. She would call me every few weeks just to chat, asking for advice about everything from career decisions to navigating family dynamics with her traditional Chinese parents. When she and Marcus couldn't make it home for holidays, Jessica would still send me thoughtful cards and small gifts that showed she'd been paying attention to my interests. I began to think of Jessica as the daughter I'd never had, and I looked forward to the day when she would officially become part of our family. But something began to change in Marcus during those New York years, and it wasn't for the better. The financial industry culture seemed to reinforce and amplify his worst tendencies toward entitlement and materialism. He started talking about his colleagues' expensive cars, luxury apartments, and exotic vacations with an envy that troubled me. He became increasingly critical of what he saw as other people's limited ambitions and poor financial decisions. During one particularly uncomfortable conversation, Marcus criticized Jessica for choosing to work in a public hospital rather than pursuing opportunities in private practice or pharmaceutical companies. She could be making twice as much money if she'd just think strategically about her career, he said dismissively. But she's too idealistic to understand that helping people doesn't have to mean being poor. Marcus, Jessica isn't poor. She makes a good living doing work that matters to her. Mom, you don't understand what good living means in today's economy. Jessica's salary might seem adequate to you, but it's not enough to support the kind of lifestyle I want to build. What kind of lifestyle is that? The kind where we can afford a house in a good neighborhood, send our kids to private schools, take real vacations, and build actual wealth instead of just getting by. I was troubled by this conversation because it revealed how Marcus was beginning to view relationships in transactional terms. Jessica wasn't just his girlfriend. She was a potential financial partner whose earning capacity was being evaluated against his ambitions. The end came about 6 months after Robert's death, when Marcus called me one evening to announce, quite casually, that he and Jessica had broken up. What happened? I asked, genuinely shocked. You two seemed so committed to each other. We just grew in different directions, Marcus said with a dismissive tone that immediately raised red flags for me. Jessica's too focused on her idealistic career goals and not enough on building real financial security. Marcus, Jessica has been building a successful career in a field she's passionate about. That seems like exactly the right approach to me. Mom, passion doesn't pay for mortgages or college tuitions. I need someone who understands that real success requires making strategic sacrifices and prioritizing financial growth. Are you saying you broke up with Jessica because she doesn't make enough money? I'm saying I broke up with Jessica because she doesn't share my vision for what our life together could become. She wants to stay in public health nursing, barely making $75,000 a year, working with underprivileged kids who can't even afford to pay for their medical care. She doesn't understand that if you want to build a meaningful life, you need to prioritize financial success. I was appalled. Marcus, $75,000 is a perfectly respectable salary, and Jessica's work helps children who desperately need medical care. How can you dismiss that as meaningless? Because, Mom, respectable isn't enough anymore. The cost of living is skyrocketing, and if you want to have real security and influence, you need to make strategic career decisions. Jessica is choosing to limit her earning potential because of some naive idea about making a difference. Making a difference is what gives life meaning, Marcus. Money is just a tool. That's easy to say when you've never had to worry about competing in today's economy. You and Dad had stable careers with pensions and benefits. My generation has to create our own security, and that requires thinking strategically about every decision. This conversation revealed something about Marcus that genuinely frightened me. He had developed a worldview where human relationships, career choices, and life decisions were evaluated primarily through the lens of financial optimization. The young man who had once volunteered at soup kitchens and tutored underprivileged students had become someone who viewed Jessica's dedication to helping sick children as a character flaw. I stayed in touch with Jessica after the breakup, and she told me a different version of the story. According to her, Marcus had become increasingly controlling about her career decisions, pressuring her to pursue opportunities in pharmaceutical, sales, or private practice that would have doubled her income but required her to abandon the work she found meaningful. Mrs. Thompson, I loved Marcus, but I couldn't build a life with someone who wanted me to become a different person, Jessica told me during one of our phone conversations. He started treating our relationship like a business partnership where my job was to maximize our combined earning potential rather than pursue work that felt important to me. Jessica also revealed that Marcus had been pressuring her to ask her parents for a loan to help him start his own investment firm, using her family's restaurant as collateral. When she refused to risk her parents' business on his entrepreneurial ambitions, Marcus accused her of not being truly committed to their future together. I realized that Marcus didn't want a partner, Jessica said sadly. He wanted a financial asset who happened to be in love with him. After the breakup, Jessica and I continued our friendship, though we were careful to keep it separate from any involvement with Marcus. She would call me every month or so, updating me on her work and asking about my adjustment to widowhood. I came to treasure these conversations because Jessica remained one of the few people in my life who seemed genuinely interested in my thoughts and experiences rather than just viewing me as someone's mother or someone's widow. About a year after the breakup, Marcus called with what he presented as exciting news. He was moving back to Connecticut to start his own investment consulting business. That's wonderful, sweetheart, I said, genuinely pleased at the prospect of having him closer to home. Are you taking a position with a firm in the area? Actually, Mom, I've decided to strike out on my own. The overhead costs in New York are astronomical, and I could build something really substantial if I had lower expenses and more space to work. Plus, there's an underserved market for sophisticated investment advice in this part of Connecticut. That sounds like a smart business decision. Have you found office space in town? Well, that's what I wanted to discuss with you. I was hoping I could move back home for a while, just until I get the business established and start generating steady revenue. It would save me thousands of dollars in rent and overhead, and it would give me a chance to spend more time with you. It seemed like a reasonable request from a son who was trying to build his own business while staying close to family. Our house certainly had plenty of space, more than I needed as a single person, and after 2 years of living alone, I was actually looking forward to having some company and feeling useful again. Of course, Marcus, this is your home too. I'd love to have you here while you're getting your business started. Thanks, Mom. You're the best. I should probably mention that I'm seeing someone new. Her name is Sarah Mitchell, and she's really special. I think what I didn't expect during those first few months after Marcus moved back home was how quickly he would transition from grateful son to entitled household dictator. It started subtly, with small suggestions about how I could optimize my living situation to better accommodate his new business venture and growing relationship with Sarah Mitchell. Marcus arrived on a crisp October morning with 2 moving trucks, despite having told me he was just bringing a few essentials while he got his business established. I watched from my kitchen window as movers unloaded enough furniture to fill. A small apartment. A massive executive desk, multiple filing cabinets, professional-grade computer equipment, a conference table with 6 chairs, and boxes upon boxes of files and office supplies. "Marcus," I said as he directed the movers to carry everything up to what had been Robert's study. "This looks like more than temporary arrangements." "I know it seems like a lot, Mom, but I need to create a professional environment for client meetings. Image is everything in the investment business, and I can't afford to look like I'm operating out of my childhood bedroom." It was a reasonable explanation, and I was actually impressed by his apparent seriousness about building a legitimate business. The study had been largely unused since Robert's death. I'd kept his books and papers there, but it had felt more like a shrine than a functional space. Having it transformed into an active office seemed like a positive development. Besides, Marcus continued, surveying the room with obvious satisfaction, "This space is perfect for what I need. The built-in bookshelves give it gravitas, the windows provide great natural light, and the separate entrance through the side porch means clients won't have to walk through the main house." I hadn't realized there was a separate entrance to the study, but Marcus was right. The French doors that opened onto the wraparound porch could indeed provide private access for business visitors. It was actually quite thoughtful of him to consider my privacy and comfort. "What kind of clients are you expecting?" I asked, genuinely curious about his business plan. "Primarily high-net-worth individuals who need sophisticated investment advice. There are a lot of successful professionals in this area, doctors, lawyers, business owners, who have substantial assets but don't have access to the kind of personalized, financial planning that the ultra-wealthy take for granted. That sounds like a genuine need in the community." "Exactly. And I have the credentials and connections to provide services that the local Edward Jones and Merrill Lynch offices can't match. I'm planning to focus on alternative investments, tax optimization strategies, and estate planning coordination." Over the following weeks, Marcus transformed Robert's study into an impressive professional office. He had the walls painted a sophisticated charcoal gray, installed professional lighting, and arranged his furniture in a way that created distinct areas for different types of client interactions. The massive executive desk dominated one corner, positioned to take advantage of the garden view, while the conference table created a more collaborative space near the built-in bookshelves. I had to admit, it looked remarkably professional. When potential clients called to schedule appointments, Marcus would give them the side entrance address and direct them to park in the circular driveway, rather than on the street. From their perspective, they were visiting an established financial planning office in a prestigious historic neighborhood. During those first weeks, I was genuinely proud of Marcus's apparent transformation from entitled finance brat to serious entrepreneur. He was working long hours, studying for additional certifications, and seemed to be approaching his business venture with the kind of thoughtful professionalism that Robert and I had always tried to instill in him. But I began to notice changes in how Marcus viewed our shared living arrangements that made me increasingly uncomfortable. The first sign of trouble came when Marcus started referring to his office in ways that seemed to extend beyond the study itself. During a phone conversation with a potential client that I happened to overhear, he described his business as being located in a restored Victorian mansion in Millbrook's historic district, without mentioning that he was living with his mother or that the mansion belonged to someone else. When I asked him about this, Marcus seemed genuinely surprised by my concern. "Mom, I'm not lying to anyone. The office is in a Victorian mansion in the historic district. Those are just facts. But you're creating the impression that you own this property, which isn't true. I never said I owned it. I just described the location accurately. If potential clients want to assume that I'm successful enough to afford a mansion, that's not my fault." "Marcus, that's deceptive. You're using my home to create a false impression about your financial status." "Mom, that's not how business works. Everyone knows that image matters in financial services. Clients want to work with advisors who appear successful and established." "Would you prefer that I tell them I'm living with my mother?" The way he said, "living with my mother," made it sound like something shameful rather than a practical arrangement that was saving him thousands of dollars in rent and overhead. But the office situation was just the beginning of a pattern that would gradually reveal how Marcus really viewed our living arrangement and my role in his life. About 6 weeks after he moved in, Marcus began bringing Sarah Mitchell around regularly. Sarah was 29 years old, blonde, and worked as a marketing coordinator for a luxury real estate firm in nearby Greenwich. She was attractive in a conventional way, well-dressed, and seemed pleasant enough during our initial interactions. But something about Sarah's attitude toward me felt different from the warm, genuine interest that Jessica had always shown. Sarah was polite but distant, treating me more like Marcus's elderly roommate than like his mother or the owner of the home where she was spending time. During their first few visits, Sarah would offer perfunctory greetings and small talk, but she never showed any curiosity about my life, my interests, or my experiences. She didn't ask about the antique furniture or artwork that filled the house, didn't comment on my extensive library, and didn't seem to notice or appreciate the beautiful details that Robert and I had spent decades perfecting. Instead, Sarah's attention was focused entirely on Marcus and his business venture. She would spend their visits in his office, discussing his client development strategies, reviewing his marketing materials, and offering suggestions about how to position his services in the local market. Sarah has a great eye for branding and presentation, Marcus told me one evening after she'd left. She's been helping me refine my client communications and develop a more sophisticated marketing approach. That's wonderful that she's supportive of your business. She really understands the importance of professional image and market positioning. She's been working with high-end clients in real estate, so she knows how to communicate with affluent professionals. I was glad that Marcus had found someone who shared his professional interests, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Sarah viewed our home primarily as a useful backdrop for Marcus's business activities, rather than as a family residence with its own history and significance. This impression was confirmed during a conversation I overheard between Marcus and Sarah about 2 months after their visits began. They were in his office with the door partially open, discussing plans for a client event he was organizing. "The house is perfect for entertaining," Sarah was saying. "We could host a cocktail reception in the main living areas. Maybe invite 20 or 30 potential clients for an elegant evening event." "That's a great idea," Marcus replied. "The formal dining room and living room would be ideal for that kind of sophisticated gathering. We'd need to be strategic about the setup," Sarah continued. "Maybe move some of the more dated furniture into storage temporarily, update the lighting, and create a more contemporary feel." "What do you mean by dated furniture?" "Well, some of your mother's antiques are beautiful, but they create a very traditional, old-fashioned atmosphere. For a client event, we'd want something more current and dynamic." They were discussing redecorating my home to better suit Marcus's business needs, without any apparent consideration of my preferences or feelings about temporarily storing furniture that Robert and I had carefully chosen and cherished. But what really bothered me was the casual way they referred to the house, as if it were a business asset rather than my home. There was no acknowledgement that I lived there, that these were my possessions, or that any changes to the environment should involve consulting me. I didn't say anything about this conversation immediately, partly because I wanted to give Marcus the benefit of the doubt, and partly because I wasn't sure how to address my concerns without seeming unreasonably controlling about a house that had plenty of space for both of us. But the pattern continued and escalated over the following weeks. Marcus began making small changes to common areas without asking my permission or even informing me in advance. He rearranged furniture in the living room to create better sightlines for his client meetings. He replaced some of my framed photographs with generic artistic prints that he felt created a more professional atmosphere. He even had new business cards printed with our home address listed as his office location. When I finally mentioned my discomfort with these changes, Marcus seemed genuinely puzzled by my reaction. "Mom, I thought you'd be happy that I'm making the house more functional and attractive. These improvements benefit both of us. Marcus, this is my home. I'd appreciate being consulted before you make changes, even small ones. But they're not really changes, they're just optimizations. And honestly, some of the decorating choices you and Dad made were pretty outdated. Updating things a bit makes the whole house feel more current. Your father and I chose every piece in this house carefully. These aren't random decorating choices, they're part of a coherent vision that we spent decades developing. I know you're attached to Dad's memory, but Mom, you can't keep the house like a museum forever. It's okay to make changes that reflect current tastes and needs. The conversation revealed something troubling about Marcus's attitude toward my autonomy and decision-making authority in my own home. He seemed to view my attachment to our carefully curated environment as sentimental nostalgia rather than legitimate preferences about how I wanted to live. But the real revelation about Marcus's evolving expectations came during what should have been a pleasant family dinner in early December. Sarah had started joining us for dinner several nights a week, and I had been making an effort to prepare more elaborate meals that would help us bond as a family unit. That particular evening, I had spent the afternoon making Sarah's favorite dish. She had mentioned loving Italian food, so I prepared homemade lasagna with a recipe that had been passed down through Robert's family. Dinner itself went well. Sarah complimented the food, Marcus talked enthusiastically about his growing client base, and the conversation felt natural and relaxed. But after dinner, as I was clearing the table, Marcus made a comment that stopped me cold. Mom, Sarah, and I have been talking about making some longer-term arrangements that would work better for everyone. What kind of arrangements? Well, my business is really taking off, and Sarah and I are getting more serious about our relationship. We're thinking it might make sense for her to move in here, at least part-time, so we can coordinate our schedules more effectively. I set down the plates I was carrying and looked at Marcus carefully. You want Sarah to move in here? Not permanently, necessarily, but maybe she could stay here a few nights a week, especially when I have early morning client meetings or evening events. It would be more convenient than her having to drive back and forth from Greenwich. Have you discussed this with Sarah? Of course, Sarah said, speaking for the first time since Marcus raised the topic. Marcus and I think it would be a practical arrangement that would give us more time together while he's building his business. And where would Sarah be staying when she's here? Well, that's something we wanted to talk to you about, Marcus said, and I could hear a note of careful preparation in his voice. The guest room upstairs is nice, but it's not really set up for regular use. Sarah would need closet space, a proper workspace for her own job, and more privacy. What are you suggesting? We were thinking it might make sense for Sarah to use the master bedroom when she stays here. It has the most space, the best bathroom, and the sitting area where she could set up a temporary office. I stared at my son, trying to process what he was suggesting. Marcus, that's my bedroom. I know, Mom, but hear us out. You're not using the sitting area at all, and honestly, do you really need that much space? The master bedroom is huge. It's like having a private apartment. It's my private apartment. That's my bedroom in my house. Of course it's your house, Mom. We're not suggesting anything permanent. Just that when Sarah stays here, it would be more comfortable for everyone if she had adequate space and privacy. And where exactly would I be sleeping during these visits? Marcus and Sarah exchanged a glance that I was beginning to recognize as their standard communication method for navigating difficult conversations. Well, Marcus said carefully, there are several options. The guest room is perfectly comfortable, or there's the daybed in the library, or we could even set up a nice sleeping area in the finished basement. The basement. He was suggesting that I sleep in the basement of my own home so that his girlfriend could have my bedroom. Marcus, are you seriously asking me to give up my bedroom so Sarah can be more comfortable? We're not asking you to give it up permanently, Mom. just to be flexible about sleeping arrangements when Sarah is here. It's a big house. There's plenty of room for everyone to be comfortable. I'm comfortable in my own bedroom, Marcus. But, Mom, think about it practically. Sarah works in luxury real estate, so she's used to high-end environments. The guest room is nice, but it doesn't have the same level of amenities as the master suite. If we want her to feel welcome here, we should offer her the best accommodations we have. I was speechless. Marcus was arguing that his girlfriend's comfort was more important than my right to sleep in my own bedroom. Moreover, he was framing this as a question of hospitality rather than an outrageous violation of normal boundaries. Marcus, in what world is it appropriate to ask your mother to give up her bedroom for your girlfriend? Mom, you're making this sound much more dramatic than it is. We're talking about practical arrangements that would work better for everyone involved. How would this work better for me? Well, you'd have more privacy when Sarah is here. And honestly, the master bedroom is probably more space than you really need. Wouldn't it be nice to have a cozier, more manageable living situation? He was suggesting that being displaced from my own bedroom would somehow benefit me by forcing me into a cozier living arrangement. The audacity was breathtaking. But what came next revealed the full extent of Marcus's evolving expectations about our living arrangement. Besides, Sarah added, it would give Margaret a chance to experience different parts of the house. Maybe she'd discover that she actually prefers one of the other rooms. Sarah had referred to me by my first name rather than as Marcus's mother, and she was talking about me as if I were a house guest who might benefit from trying out different accommodations rather than the homeowner whose preferences should determine sleeping arrangements. Sarah, I said as calmly as I could manage, I've been sleeping in that bedroom for 26 years. I know which room I prefer. Of course, she said with a bright smile that didn't reach her eyes. I just meant that sometimes change can be refreshing. When I was growing up, my family would rearrange our sleeping arrangements whenever we had extended guests, and it always felt like a fun adventure. She was comparing my situation to childhood sleepovers rather than recognizing it as a homeowner, being asked to accommodate her son's girlfriend's preferences. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Marcus and Sarah presenting increasingly elaborate justifications for why their suggested arrangement was reasonable and beneficial for everyone involved. They talked about privacy, convenience, optimal space utilization, and the importance of making guests feel welcome. What they never acknowledged was the fundamental inappropriateness of expecting a 70-year-old woman to give up her own bedroom in her own home so that her adult son's girlfriend could be more comfortable during voluntary visits. But this conversation was just the beginning of a pattern that would reveal exactly how Marcus and Sarah viewed my role in what they were beginning to consider their living situation. Over the following weeks, the requests became more frequent and more presumptuous. Marcus asked if Sarah could store some clothes in the spare closet in my bedroom. Sarah wondered if she could use my bathroom's soaking tub because the guest bathroom only had a shower. Marcus suggested that Sarah could set up a workspace in my sitting area since I wasn't using it during the day. Each request was presented as reasonable and temporary, but collectively they amounted to a systematic takeover of my private space by people who seemed to believe that my comfort and preferences were less important than their convenience. But perhaps most troubling was the way they had begun to talk about the house itself. During conversations about Marcus's business growth and their relationship plans, they would refer to our space and our needs as if they were co-owners rather than guests in my home. We're going to need to think about long-term arrangements, Marcus said during one particularly presumptuous conversation. If my business continues growing at this rate, we'll need more space for client meetings and administrative work. What kind of arrangements? Well, we could finish the basement as additional office space, or maybe convert the third floor into a proper apartment for Sarah when she's here. Marcus, you're talking about major renovations to my house. Not major, Mom, just optimizations. That would make the space work better for everyone's needs. Whose needs exactly? All of our needs. You'd benefit from having a more functional house, I'd have better facilities for my business, and Sarah would have a proper place to stay when she's here. The word when had gradually been replaced by while, suggesting that Sarah's presence was becoming less temporary and more permanent than originally discussed. But the most revealing conversation happened in late December, when Marcus and Sarah were discussing their plans for New Year's Eve. "We could host a party here," Sarah suggested. "Invite some of Marcus's clients and maybe some of my colleagues from the real estate firm." "That's a great idea," Marcus replied. "This house is perfect for entertaining, and it would be a good opportunity to showcase the business in an elegant setting." "We'd need to be thoughtful about the guest list and the setup," Sarah continued. "Maybe 40 or 50 people, with catering and professional bartending. And we could use the whole first floor, living room, dining room, library, even the conservatory." They were planning to host a business party for 50 people in my home without asking my permission or even informing me that they were considering such an event. When I asked about their plans, Marcus seemed surprised that I wasn't automatically enthusiastic about the idea. "Mom, it would be great for the business, and you'd enjoy meeting some interesting people. Everyone who works in luxury services around here is sophisticated and cultured." "Marcus, I wasn't invited to plan this party. I was told about it. Of course you're invited to plan it, Mom. We'd love your input on menu selection and decorating ideas." "That's not what I meant. I meant that you're planning to host a party in my home without asking if I wanted to have a party." "But Mom, why wouldn't you want to have a party? You used to love entertaining when Dad was alive." "I loved entertaining when your father and I planned events together for people we wanted to spend time with. This is different." "How is it different?" "You're asking me to let you use my home as a venue for your business networking event. I'm asking you to let us host a party that would benefit everyone involved. You'd meet interesting people. I'd advance my business relationships, and Sarah would get to experience the house in a more social setting." Once again, Marcus was framing his request as something that would benefit me rather than acknowledging that he was asking for a significant favor that would require me to open my home to 50 strangers for his professional purposes. But what really bothered me was the assumption underlying all of these conversations, that my preferences, comfort, and autonomy were negotiable in service of Marcus's business needs and relationship goals. During all of these escalating requests and presumptions, I found myself thinking more and more often about Jessica Chen. Not just because I missed her warmth and genuine interest in my life, but because I was beginning to understand what she had meant when she described feeling like Marcus wanted her to become a different person to suit his ambitions. I was experiencing something similar. Marcus seemed to want me to become a more accommodating, less autonomous version of myself. Someone who would happily sacrifice her comfort and preferences to support his vision of success and domestic convenience. But unlike Jessica, I wasn't a young woman trying to build a life with someone I loved. I was a 70-year-old homeowner who had every right to determine how my own house was used and who was welcome in my own bedroom. The question was, what was I going to do about it? Because it was becoming clear that Marcus and Sarah's expectations were only going to continue expanding, and their respect for my autonomy was only going to continue diminishing. But what they didn't know was that while they were planning their future use of my house, I had been having some very interesting conversations with some very unexpected people. Conversations that were about to change the entire dynamic of our living arrangement in ways that neither of them could possibly have anticipated. The small betrayals began in January, subtle at first but increasingly bold as Marcus and Sarah grew more comfortable with their expanding control over my home and my life. What I didn't realize at the time was that each seemingly minor boundary violation was actually part of a calculated strategy to gradually normalize their authority over my living situation. The first real sign that something fundamental had shifted came when I discovered that Marcus had given Sarah a key to the house without asking my permission or even informing me that he'd done so. I found out quite by accident on a Tuesday morning when I was returning from my weekly grocery shopping trip. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw Sarah's silver BMW parked in what had always been my designated spot near the kitchen entrance. This was unusual because Sarah typically visited in the evenings or on weekends when Marcus was home, and it was only 10 a.m. on a weekday. When I entered through the front door, since my usual entrance was blocked by Sarah's car, I could hear voices coming from the kitchen. Sarah was on the phone, clearly conducting some kind of business call, while what sounded like coffee brewing and dishes clinking suggested she was making herself quite comfortable. "No, the Hartwell property won't work for them," she was saying as I approached the kitchen. "The client specifically requested something with more grandeur, more old-world elegance. They want the kind of place that makes a statement about their success and sophistication." I paused in the hallway, not wanting to interrupt what was obviously a work call, but also feeling uncomfortable about Sarah conducting business in my kitchen without my knowledge or permission. "Actually, I might have the perfect solution," Sarah continued, and I could hear her moving around the kitchen as she spoke. "I'm currently staying in this incredible Victorian mansion in Millbrook's historic district. It's exactly the kind of property they're looking for. 1890s Queen Anne architecture, completely restored, museum-quality furnishings, spectacular gardens. The owner might be interested in discussing a private sale." My blood ran cold. Sarah was in my kitchen using my coffee, discussing selling my house to her real estate clients as if she had any authority to negotiate such a transaction. When I entered the kitchen, Sarah looked up with a bright smile and gave me a little wave. But she didn't interrupt her phone conversation or show any embarrassment about conducting business in my home without permission. "Let me call you back in a few minutes," she said into the phone. "I need to discuss some details with the property owner." She hung up and turned to me with the kind of confident familiarity that suggested this was a routine occurrence rather than an unprecedented intrusion. "Good morning, Margaret. I hope you don't mind that I let myself in. Marcus gave me a key last week so I could help coordinate some things for his business. I made coffee. Your espresso machine is absolutely wonderful." There were several layers of presumption in this casual explanation that left me momentarily speechless. Marcus had given her a key without consulting me. She had used that key to enter my home when I wasn't there. She was conducting her own business calls from my kitchen, and she had just offered to help sell my house to strangers. "Sarah," I said as calmly as I could manage, "I wasn't aware that Marcus had given you a key." "Oh, I hope that's okay. It just makes things so much more convenient for coordinating schedules and handling business logistics. Sometimes Marcus has early client meetings and I need to be here to help with setup or catering coordination." "Catering coordination?" "Well, Marcus has been hosting more client meetings here, and sometimes that involves providing refreshments or even full meals. It's much easier if I can arrive early to handle the arrangements without having to wait for Marcus to let me in." This was the first I'd heard about client meetings in my home involving catering, and I was beginning to understand that Marcus and Sarah had been making arrangements about my property that went far beyond what I'd been told. "And the phone call I just overheard?" "Oh, that," Sarah laughed as if it were perfectly amusing. "One of my clients is looking for exactly this kind of property, and I couldn't help thinking how perfect your house would be for them. They're a lovely couple from Manhattan. He's a successful hedge fund manager, and she's an art dealer. And they're looking for a weekend retreat that has real character and elegance." "Sarah, this house isn't for sale." "Of course not. I wasn't suggesting that you'd want to sell. I was just thinking that if you ever did consider it, I could probably get you an amazing price. Properties like this are incredibly rare, and my clients are willing to pay premium prices for the right place." The way she phrased this, "if you ever did consider it," suggested that she was planting seeds for future conversations rather than making a one-time comment. She was positioning herself as someone who could facilitate a profitable transaction should I ever decide to sell my home. But what really bothered me was the casual assumption that she could evaluate my house as a potential listing, discuss it with clients, and present herself as having some kind of relationship with the property owner that would enable her to negotiate a sale. Sarah, I need to be clear about something. This house is not available for sale, and I would appreciate it if you didn't discuss it with your clients as if it were a potential listing. Of course, Margaret, I completely understand. I just get excited when I see properties that would be perfect for my clients. It's a professional habit. I'm always evaluating beautiful homes and imagining how they'd work for different families. Her explanation sounded reasonable on the surface, but it didn't address the fact that she had been conducting this evaluation and discussion without my knowledge or permission, from my own kitchen, using access that I hadn't authorized. The key incident was troubling enough, but it was just the beginning of a pattern of boundary violations that would escalate throughout January and February. A few days later, I discovered that Sarah had been rearranging furniture in the living room to better accommodate Marcus's client meetings. When I asked about the changes, Marcus explained that Sarah had offered to help optimize the space for business use. She has a great eye for staging and presentation, he said. Some of the furniture arrangements were creating awkward traffic flow for client meetings, so Sarah suggested some improvements that would make the space more functional. Marcus, I would have preferred to be consulted before furniture was moved. But Mom, they're just minor adjustments that make the room work better. Sarah wasn't changing anything permanently, just creating a more professional atmosphere for business meetings. This is my living room, not a business conference facility. Of course it's your living room. But since I'm using it occasionally, for client meetings, doesn't it make sense to arrange it in a way that works well for both personal and professional use? This conversation revealed something important about how Marcus was beginning to view shared spaces in my home. Rather than asking permission to use my living room for business meetings, he was now asking me to accommodate permanent changes to my furniture arrangements to better serve his business needs. But the furniture rearrangement was minor compared to what I discovered the following week. Came home from a library board meeting on a Thursday evening to find Sarah in my bedroom, going through my jewelry box. "Oh, hi Margaret," she said when she noticed me standing in the doorway. "I hope you don't mind. I was looking for something to borrow for Marcus's client dinner tonight." Sarah was in my bedroom, uninvited, going through my personal belongings, looking for jewelry to borrow for an event that I hadn't been told about. "Sarah, what are you doing in my room?" Marcus said. "I could borrow some jewelry for tonight. We're taking some important clients to dinner at that new French restaurant in Greenwich, and I wanted to wear something elegant that would make a good impression." "Marcus said you could go through my jewelry?" "Well, he said you had some beautiful pieces and that you probably wouldn't mind if I borrowed something special for a business dinner. I was looking for maybe a necklace or earrings that would go with this dress." She gestured to a sophisticated black cocktail dress that she was wearing, clearly an expensive piece that looked appropriate for high-end business entertaining. But the issue wasn't her attire or even her desire to borrow jewelry. The issue was that she was going through my personal belongings in my private bedroom without my permission. "Sarah, I need you to leave my room immediately." "Of course, I'm sorry if I overstepped. Marcus just thought you'd be happy to help us make a good impression with these clients. They represent a lot of potential business for him." Even her apology was framed as a misunderstanding about my willingness to help, rather than an acknowledgement that going through someone's personal belongings without permission was inappropriate regardless of the business justification. But what I found most disturbing was that Marcus had apparently told Sarah that she could go through my jewelry box without asking me directly. He was giving his girlfriend permission to access my personal belongings as if he had authority over my possessions. When I confronted Marcus about this later that evening, his response was even more troubling than Sarah's. "Mom, I didn't think you'd mind. You have so much beautiful jewelry that you never wear anymore. Sarah just needed something elegant for an important business dinner." "Marcus, it doesn't matter whether I wear the jewelry or not. Sarah doesn't have the right to go through my personal belongings without asking me directly." But she did ask. She asked me, and I told her it would probably be fine. "You don't have the authority to give someone else permission to go through my things." "Mom, that seems like a pretty rigid way to think about it. We're all living here. together, and sometimes it makes sense to share resources when someone has a legitimate need. Sharing resources involves asking permission, not just taking things because you think the owner probably won't mind. I guess I thought that since we're family, and Sarah is becoming part of the family, we could be a little more flexible about these kinds of boundaries. This conversation revealed something crucial about Marcus's evolving perspective on my autonomy and property rights. He was beginning to view my possessions as family resources that could be shared based on his judgment about my likely preferences rather than through explicit permission-seeking. Moreover, he was unilaterally deciding that Sarah was becoming part of the family in ways that entitled her to access my personal belongings. But the jewelry incident was just a preview of much more serious boundary violations that were coming. In mid-February, I returned from a weekend visit with my sister in Vermont to find that Marcus and Sarah had hosted what they called a small client reception in my home while I was away. I discovered this when I found champagne glasses in my dishwasher, catering, trays in my refrigerator, and business cards scattered on my dining room table from people I'd never heard of. "How was your weekend with Aunt Helen?" Marcus asked when I called him to ask about the evidence of entertaining that I'd found throughout the house. "Marcus, did you have a party here while I was gone?" "Not a party exactly, just a small client. Reception. About 20 people. Sarah thought it would be a good opportunity to showcase the business in an elegant setting while you were away so we wouldn't disturb your routine." "You hosted a business event in my home without asking my permission?" "Mom, I thought you'd appreciate that we waited until you were out of town so it wouldn't inconvenience you. And honestly, I was planning to ask. But your trip came up suddenly. And I didn't want to bother you with details when you were trying to spend quality time with Aunt Helen." "Marcus, having events in my home without my permission isn't considerate. It's a violation of my property rights." That seems like a pretty extreme way to characterize it. "We took excellent care of everything, hired professional catering and cleaning services, and made sure the house was in perfect condition when you returned." That's not the point. The point is that this is my home, and I have the right to know about and approve any events that happen here. Of course you do. I just thought that in this case, since it was a business necessity and you were going to be away anyway, it made sense to handle it independently rather than bother you with logistics. Once again, Marcus was framing his boundary violation as consideration for my convenience rather than acknowledging it as a fundamental breach of respect for my autonomy and property rights. But what I learned over the following days made the situation even worse. Sarah had apparently been telling people at the reception that she and Marcus were managing the property for me, creating the impression that they had some kind of official role in overseeing my home and its use. I found this out when Mrs. Henderson, my next-door neighbor, stopped by to ask about the young people who are helping you with the house. "What? Young people?" I asked. "The lovely young woman who introduced herself as your property manager at the party last weekend. She mentioned that you were transitioning into a more assisted living situation and that she and your son were helping coordinate the household management." Sarah had told my neighbors that I was transitioning into assisted living and that she was my property manager. She had created a completely false narrative about my living situation and her role in my life. When I confronted Marcus about this, he initially tried to downplay the significance of Sarah's comments. I'm sure she didn't mean anything misleading by it. Sarah was probably just trying to explain our living arrangement in a way that would make sense to strangers. "Marcus, she told my neighbors that I was moving into assisted living and that she was my property manager. I'm sure there was just some confusion in the conversation. Sarah works in real estate, so people probably assumed she had some professional relationship with the property." "There's no confusion here, Marcus. Sarah deliberately misrepresented our relationship and my living situation to my neighbors." "Mom, I think you might be overreacting. Sarah was probably just trying to handle a social situation gracefully without getting into personal family details with people she didn't know." But when I spoke to Sarah directly about the conversation with Mrs. Henderson, Her response was even more revealing. "Oh, Margaret, I'm so sorry if there was any confusion. I was just trying to avoid getting into personal details about family arrangements. Sometimes it's easier to give people a simple explanation that they can understand, rather than trying to explain complex family dynamics." "What complex family dynamics?" "Well, you know, the fact that you're getting older and Marcus is helping you maintain this big house. People understand the concept of family members stepping in to help with property management as parents age. Sarah, I don't need help maintaining this house, and Marcus isn't managing my property." "Of course not. I just meant that from an outside perspective it might look like that kind of arrangement. I was trying to give your neighbors a framework for understanding why Marcus and I were hosting an event here." Sarah was suggesting that the natural assumption for anyone observing our living situation would be that I was too old to manage my own property and that Marcus was taking over household responsibilities. She was normalizing a narrative about my decline and dependence that bore no relationship to reality. But perhaps most troubling was her assumption that she had the right to craft explanations about my life and living situation to my own neighbors, without consulting me or caring whether those explanations were accurate. The pattern of boundary violations continued to escalate throughout February. Sarah began storing clothes in my bedroom closet without asking. Marcus started scheduling client meetings during times when I'd be using common areas, then suggesting that I might be more comfortable in my room while business was being conducted. Sarah rearranged my kitchen to better accommodate the catering for Marcus's client events. Each individual incident was presented as reasonable and temporary, but collectively they amounted to a systematic takeover of my home by people who seemed to believe that my comfort and preferences were less important than their convenience and business needs. But the most revealing incident came in early March, when I overheard a phone conversation between Marcus and someone he was clearly trying to impress, potentially a major client or business partner. I was in my library, reading quietly, when Marcus's voice carried through the French doors that connected my library to his office. He was speaking more loudly than usual, with the kind of performative confidence that suggested he was trying to project success and authority. "The business has been growing faster than we anticipated," he was saying. "We've had to expand our facilities significantly to accommodate new clients and services." This was an interesting characterization of his rent-free operation out of my home study. "The office space is perfect for our needs. We're located in a historic Victorian mansion that provides exactly the kind of prestigious atmosphere that high-net-worth clients expect. The property includes multiple meeting areas, entertainment, facilities, and all the amenities necessary for sophisticated client services." He was describing my home as if it were his business facility, using language that suggested ownership or control rather than a temporary arrangement with his mother. "We're actually considering expanding further," Marcus continued. "The property has excellent potential for additional office space and client entertainment areas. We're looking at finishing some additional square footage in the basement level and possibly converting the third floor into executive meeting facilities." Marcus was discussing major renovations to my home as if they were his business decisions to make. He was telling someone, presumably a client or investor, that he was planning to finish my basement and convert my third floor into business facilities. "The location is ideal for our target clientele," he continued. "Millbrook is exactly the kind of prestigious community where successful professionals want to conduct their financial planning. Being based in a historic mansion gives us credibility and gravitas that you can't get from a generic office building." The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, with Marcus describing his facilities, his expansion plans, and his prestigious location as if my home were his business property rather than a temporary arrangement that depended entirely on my continued goodwill. But what came next was even more shocking. "Actually, we're in the process of securing more permanent arrangements for the property," Marcus said. "The current situation has been working well as a temporary solution, but we're looking at formalizing our occupancy to better support long-term business growth." Formalizing occupancy. Marcus was telling someone that he was working on securing permanent rights to my property for his business use. The owner is elderly and has been very accommodating about our needs, but we want to make sure we have stable, long-term access to the facilities as the business continues expanding. He was describing me as an elderly property owner who had been accommodating about his business needs, as if I were a landlord he was negotiating with rather than his mother who was providing him with free housing and office space. When the call ended, I sat in my library for a long time trying to process what I had heard. Marcus wasn't just using my home for his business. He was actively working on securing permanent rights to it. He was describing me to business contacts as an elderly property owner rather than his mother. And he was making plans for major renovations and expansions without any intention of consulting me about whether I wanted my home converted into his business facility. That evening, I decided to have a direct conversation with Marcus about what I had overheard and what his actual intentions were for our living arrangement. Marcus, I overheard part of your business call today, and I'm concerned about some of the things you were discussing. Oh? What specifically? You were talking about expansion plans for the house and formalizing your occupancy arrangements. What did you mean by that? Marcus looked uncomfortable for the first time since he'd moved back home. I was just discussing potential scenarios with a business partner. Nothing concrete. What kind of scenarios? Well, if the business continues growing, we'll need to think about long-term space requirements. I was just explaining our current situation and some possible future options. Marcus, you told someone that you were working on securing permanent arrangements for this property. I may have gotten a little ahead of myself in trying to sound established and forward-thinking. You know how business conversations are. Everyone wants to sound like they have everything figured out. Are you actually working on formalizing your occupancy here? Not exactly working on it, no. But Mom, I have been thinking that it might make sense to discuss some kind of longer-term arrangement that would work for both of us. What kind of arrangement? Well, my business is really taking off, and it's clear that this location is perfect for what I'm doing. Maybe we could work out some kind of formal agreement that would give me security for business planning while also providing you with some income from the property. Marcus was suggesting that I should enter into a rental agreement with him for my own home, transforming our family living arrangement into a landlord-tenant relationship where he would pay me rent for the privilege of taking over my property for his business use. Marcus, are you asking me to rent my house to you? Not the whole house, obviously. Just a formal arrangement for the office space, and maybe some additional areas as the business grows. It would be good for both of us. You'd have rental income, and I'd have the security of knowing my business location is stable. And what areas would be included in this rental arrangement? Initially, just the office, and maybe the dining room for client meetings. But as I mentioned, there's potential for expansion into other areas if the business continues growing. The casual way he mentioned potential expansion into other areas suggested that he was envisioning a rental arrangement that could gradually encompass more and more of my home as his business needs grew. And where would I be living while you're renting these areas? You'd still have your bedroom, the kitchen, the living room, and the library. Plenty of space for your needs. Marcus was proposing to convert my home into his business facility while allowing me to continue living in a few rooms as his tenant in common. He was suggesting that I should pay to maintain and insure a property that he would primarily be using for his commercial purposes. Marcus, this is my home. I don't want to become your tenant in my own house. You wouldn't be my tenant, Mom. We'd be sharing the space in a way that works for both our needs. I'd pay you market rate for the business areas, which would probably be $3,000 or $4,000 a month. That's good income for space you're not really using anyway. The suggestion that I wasn't really using my dining room, study, and other areas revealed how completely Marcus had redefined my relationship to my own home. In his mind, any space that I didn't actively occupy every day was available for his business use. But what troubled me most was the broader pattern that this conversation represented. Over the course of 4 months, Marcus had gradually escalated from asking for temporary housing assistance to proposing that I formally convert my home into his business facility while paying him rent for the privilege. Each step in this escalation had been presented as reasonable and mutually beneficial, but collectively they represented a systematic attempt to transfer control of my property from me to him. And throughout this entire process, Sarah had been encouraging and facilitating these boundary violations, while positioning herself as an increasingly permanent part of the household. I was beginning to understand that Marcus and Sarah had been implementing a deliberate strategy to gradually normalize their control over my home and my life. They weren't just being inconsiderate or presumptuous. They were systematically working to establish themselves as the primary occupants and decision-makers, while reducing me to the role of accommodating elderly relative who should be grateful for their management of her affairs. But what they didn't know was that while they were busy planning my gradual displacement from my own home, I had been making some phone calls of my own. Phone calls that were about to change everything they thought they understood about my resources, my connections, and my willingness to let them continue treating me like a convenient property manager in my own house. Because sometimes when people start making plans for your life without consulting you, the best response is to make some plans of your own that they definitely won't see coming. The moment that changed everything came on a warm April evening, during what should have been a celebration of Marcus's business success. Instead, it became the night when he finally revealed exactly how disposable he considered me to be in my own home. Marcus had secured his largest client to date, a tech entrepreneur from Silicon Valley who was relocating to Connecticut and needed comprehensive wealth management services. This client represented potentially millions in assets under management, and Marcus was understandably excited about landing such a significant account. "Mom, this is it," he had told me that morning. "This client could establish my firm as a major player in the regional market. If I can deliver exceptional service for him, he'll refer other high-net-worth individuals from his network." I was genuinely happy for Marcus's success, despite my growing concerns about his methods and attitude. Whatever our personal conflicts, I wanted him to succeed professionally, and I understood that building a client base in the competitive financial services industry required dedication and strategic thinking. "That's wonderful, Marcus. You've worked hard to build the business." "I really have. And Sarah's been incredible through this whole process. She's helped me understand how to position services for luxury clients, how to create the right atmosphere for high-level business relationships. I'm glad she's been supportive. Actually, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. This client is coming for dinner tomorrow night. Just him, his wife, Sarah, and me. It's a casual evening, but it's also the most important business dinner I've ever hosted. Of course, I'll make sure to stay out of your way and let you handle everything professionally." "Well, actually, Mom, Sarah and I have been talking, and we think it might be better if you weren't here tomorrow evening." I looked at my son carefully, trying to understand what he was suggesting. "You want me to leave my own home so you can have a business dinner?" "It's not that we want you to leave exactly. It's just that this is such a crucial business opportunity, and we want to control every aspect of the evening to make sure it goes perfectly." "And my presence would prevent it from going perfectly?" Marcus looked uncomfortable, but he pressed forward with what was clearly a conversation he and Sarah had planned in advance. "Mom, you have to understand how these high-level business relationships work. Image and presentation are everything. This client is used to dealing with successful, sophisticated professionals who have a certain lifestyle and social presence. And what does that have to do with me?" "Well, honestly, having my 70-year-old mother present at a business dinner might create the wrong impression about my independence and professional status." I stared at my son, trying to process what he was saying. He was asking me to leave my own home because my presence would damage his professional image. "Marcus, are you telling me that you're embarrassed by me?" "It's not about embarrassment. Mom, it's about creating the right business atmosphere. This client needs to see me as an established, independent professional, Not as someone who's still living with his mother. But you are living with your mother, in your mother's house. I know that, and you know that. But from a business perspective, it's better if this client sees me as the primary resident who's hosting an elegant dinner in his own home. The word his hung in the air between us. Marcus was asking me to disappear from my own home so that he could pretend to be its owner for the purpose of impressing a business client. Marcus, this is my house. I'm not going to pretend otherwise to help you deceive a client. You wouldn't be pretending anything, Mom. You'd just be not present. Sarah and I can handle the dinner, and you could have a nice evening out. Maybe visit Aunt Helen or go to dinner with some of your library friends. You want me to leave my home and find somewhere else to spend the evening so you can use my house to impress a client. I want us to work together to make sure this business opportunity is successful. This client could change everything for my firm, Mom. The revenue from managing his portfolio could allow me to expand, hire staff, maybe even rent proper office space eventually. The promise of proper office space eventually was clearly meant to suggest that my displacement would be temporary. That if this business dinner went well, Marcus would be able to afford his own place and I could have my home back. But I was beginning to understand that Marcus's promises about future independence were part of his strategy for securing continued accommodation, rather than genuine plans for moving out. Marcus, I understand that this is an important business opportunity, but asking me to leave my own home so you can pretend to be its owner is completely inappropriate. Mom, you're making this much more dramatic than it needs to be. I'm asking you to be flexible about one evening so that we can both benefit from a successful business outcome. How would I benefit from you lying to a client about whose house this is? You'd benefit because my business success means I'll be able to contribute more to household expenses, eventually pay you proper rent, and maybe even help you with some of the home maintenance projects you've been putting off. Once again, Marcus was framing his request as something that would benefit me rather than acknowledging that he was asking for an enormous favor that involved lying about property ownership and excluding me from my own home. But what came next revealed the full extent of his expectations. Besides, Marcus continued, Sarah's been talking to some of her real estate contacts, and there might be some interesting opportunities for you to consider. What kind of opportunities? Well, you know how Sarah mentioned that one of her clients was interested in a property like this? She's been doing some research, and apparently there's a real market for historic homes in this area. You could probably get $1.2 or $1.3 million for this place if you marketed it properly. My stomach dropped. Marcus wasn't just asking me to leave for one evening. He was suggesting that I should sell my house entirely. Marcus, I don't want to sell my house. But Mom, think about it practically. This house is way too big for one person. The maintenance costs are enormous, and you're not really using most of the space anyway. You could sell it for a substantial profit and buy something smaller and more manageable. Like what? Like a nice condo, or maybe one of those senior living communities with activities and social opportunities. You'd have much less responsibility and probably be happier around people your own age. Marcus was suggesting that I should sell the home Robert and I had spent 26 years restoring, take the proceeds, and move into a senior living facility so that he could... What? Continue using my former home for his business? Marcus, what? Would happen to your business if I sold the house? Well, Sarah thinks her client might be interested in a leaseback arrangement for the office space. I could rent the study and maybe a few other areas from the new owners and continue operating. The business here, the plan was becoming clear. Marcus wanted me to sell my home to Sarah's client, who would then rent office space back to Marcus, allowing him to continue operating his business out of my former home while I lived in a senior facility somewhere else. I would give up my house, my independence, and my community connections so that Marcus could maintain his business location and Sarah could earn a real estate commission. Marcus, that's the most ridiculous proposal I've ever heard. Why is it ridiculous? You'd get market value for the house, I'd have secure business facilities, and everyone would benefit from the arrangement. I would benefit by losing my home and moving into a senior facility? You'd benefit by having substantial liquid assets and no maintenance responsibilities. Mom, you're 70 years old. Don't you want to simplify your life and enjoy your retirement instead of worrying about property management? Marcus was suggesting that homeownership was a burden I should be happy to escape, rather than an asset and source of independence that I had every right to maintain. But what came next was even worse. Actually, Marcus said, there's something else Sarah and I wanted to discuss with you about tomorrow night's dinner. What else? Well, if you do decide to stay home, we'd need you to be really careful about how you present yourself in our living situation. What do you mean? We'd need you to let me handle all the hosting duties and avoid mentioning that you own the house. If anyone asks about our relationship, it would be better to say that you're staying here temporarily while I manage the property. Marcus was asking me to lie about owning my own home and to pretend that he was managing my property, rather than living in it rent-free. Marcus, you want me to tell people that you're managing my property? Not managing exactly, but maybe just avoid getting into specifics about ownership and financial arrangements. It's better for business relationships if clients see me as the established resident rather than getting into complicated family dynamics. There's nothing complicated about the fact that I own this house and you're living in it. But from a business perspective, it's simpler if clients see me as the primary resident who's in control of the environment where we're conducting business. I stared at my son, this man I had raised to be honest and respectful, who was now asking me to lie about my own property ownership to help him deceive a business client. Marcus, I'm not going to lie to strangers about owning my own home. Then maybe it really would be better if you went out for the evening. We could tell them you're traveling or visiting family or just busy with your own social commitments. We were back to Marcus asking me to leave my own home. But now, with the added element of his willingness to lie about my whereabouts to support his deception about property ownership. The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, with Marcus presenting increasingly elaborate justifications for why his business success required me to either disappear from my own home or lie about my relationship to it. But the final straw came when Sarah joined the conversation and revealed the full scope of their expectations. Margaret, she said with that bright, confident smile I had come to recognize as her standard approach to difficult conversations. Marcus and I have been thinking about this situation from all angles, and we really think tomorrow night could be the beginning of some positive changes for everyone. What kind of changes? Well, if this dinner goes well and Marcus lands this major client, it would prove that the business can succeed at this location. That might open up some interesting possibilities for formalizing our arrangement here. What kind of arrangement? Marcus. Could start paying you fair market rent for the office space and entertainment areas. You'd have guaranteed income from the property, and we could all settle into a more permanent situation that works for everyone's needs. Sarah was describing a scenario where Marcus's business success would lead to him paying me rent to live in my own home, while I accepted a subordinate role as his landlord, rather than the homeowner. And if I'm not interested in becoming Marcus's landlord? Well, Sarah said, exchanging a glance with Marcus, that's where some of the other opportunities I mentioned might be relevant. Such as? I've been doing some research on comparable properties in the area, and I think we could get you an excellent price for this house. Probably $1.3 million, maybe more if we market it correctly. And then what? Then you'd have substantial assets to work with. You could buy a lovely condo or choose from some really nice assisted living facilities. There's a beautiful place in Greenwich that specializes in cultured, educated seniors. They have art classes, book clubs, organized travel, all sorts of activities that might be more engaging than maintaining this big house by yourself. Sarah was describing my future living arrangements as if she and Marcus had been appointed to make decisions about my life and housing situation. Sarah, I don't want to move to an assisted living facility. Of course you don't want to think about it now. But Margaret, You have to be realistic about the future. You're 70 years old, living alone in a house that's way too big for your needs. Wouldn't it be better to make these transitions while you're still healthy and able to enjoy new experiences? I'm perfectly healthy and I enjoy living in my own home. But for how much longer? What happens if you get sick or have an accident? Or just can't manage the physical demands of maintaining this property? Wouldn't it be smarter to plan ahead rather than wait for a crisis? Sarah was suggesting that my age automatically made me a candidate for assisted living, regardless of my actual health, competence, or preferences. Sarah, I'm not interested in selling my house or moving to a facility. I understand why you'd resist the idea, Marcus said. But Mom, you have to think about this logically. You're going to have to make these decisions eventually. Wouldn't it be better to do it now, when you can get maximum value for the house and have time to find the perfect new living situation? And what about your business? If I sell the house, where would you operate from? Well, like I mentioned, Sarah's client might be interested in a leaseback arrangement, or I could use the success from this client to secure proper office space somewhere else. Or, Sarah added, depending on the buyer, there might be opportunities for Marcus to continue using the space as a property manager or caretaker, while the new owners use it primarily as a weekend retreat. The plan was becoming even clearer. They wanted me to sell my house to someone who would hire Marcus to manage it, allowing him to continue living in my former home while I moved to a senior facility. I would lose my house, my independence, and my community connections while Marcus maintained his lifestyle, and Sarah earned a substantial real estate commission. So let me understand this, I said as calmly as I could manage. You want me to leave my home tomorrow night so Marcus can pretend to own it for a business dinner. If that goes well, you want me to either become Marcus's tenant in my own house, or sell the house entirely and move to assisted living so that Marcus can continue operating his business here under new ownership. Mom, you're making it sound much more calculated than it is, Marcus said. We're just trying to find solutions that would work for everyone's changing needs. Whose needs are changing? Well, your needs as you get older, my needs as my business. Grows Sarah's needs as we get more serious about our relationship. What about Sarah's needs? Sarah and I are talking about getting engaged, Marcus announced, as if this were happy news that I should be excited about, rather than another complication in an already impossible situation. And an engagement would affect our living arrangements. How? Well, obviously Sarah would need to move in here permanently. And frankly, Mom, this house is big enough for all of us if we organize it thoughtfully. Organize it how? Sarah could take the master bedroom. It's really the only room with adequate space and amenities for a couple. You could use the guest room, which is perfectly comfortable and actually might be easier for you since it's smaller and requires less maintenance. Marcus was suggesting that I should give up my bedroom to his girlfriend and move into the guest room of my own house. And if the guest room isn't suitable? Well, Sarah said, there's always the finished basement. It's actually quite spacious and private. We could set it up as a lovely apartment-style space with a sitting area, sleeping area, and even a small kitchenette. The basement. Sarah was suggesting that I should move to the basement of my own house so that she and Marcus could take over the main living areas. You want me to live in the basement? Not live in the basement exactly, Marcus said quickly. Just use it as your primary space while Sarah and I use the upstairs for our needs. You'd still have access to the whole house, of course. When would I have access to the whole house? Well, during business hours, you'd probably want to stay out of the office areas anyway. And when we're entertaining clients or having dinner parties, it might be more comfortable for you to have your own space, where you don't have to worry about social obligations. Marcus was describing a living arrangement where I would be confined to the basement of my own house during business hours and social events, emerging only when my presence wouldn't interfere with his professional or personal activities. Marcus, are you seriously asking me to move to the basement of my own house? I'm asking you to consider flexible living arrangements that would work for everyone as our family situation evolves. What family situation? Mom, Sarah, and I are planning to get married. This is going to be our family home. Doesn't it make sense to organize the space in a way that reflects everyone's needs and priorities? This is not going to be your family home, Marcus. This is my family home, the home your father and I built together. But Dad is gone, Mom, and you can't maintain this place forever. Sarah and I are offering to help you stay here in a way that works for everyone. By moving me to the basement? By creating a living arrangement where you're safe, comfortable, and still close to family, while we handle the responsibilities of maintaining the property and managing the household. Marcus was describing my relocation to the basement as a service they would be providing to me rather than a massive imposition they were demanding. But what came next revealed the true scope of their expectations. There's one more thing we need to discuss, Sarah said. If we're going to make this arrangement work, we'll need to be realistic about financial responsibilities. What financial responsibilities? Well, Marcus's business is growing, but he's still building his client base. And I'll be contributing to household expenses once I move in permanently. But the reality is that maintaining a property this size is expensive. I've been maintaining this property for 26 years. Of course you have. But Margaret, you have to think about the future. Property taxes, insurance, utilities, maintenance, repairs. These costs are only going to increase as the house ages and as you get older. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that it might make sense for you to contribute to household expenses in proportion to your use of the space. Sarah was suggesting that I should pay rent to live in my own house. Sarah, I own this house. I pay the property taxes, insurance, and utilities. But if Marcus and I are handling the day-to-day management and maintenance, and if we're using most of the space for business and living purposes, it might be fair for you to contribute to those costs based on the square footage you're actually using. You want me to pay rent based on square footage? Not rent exactly, but maybe a proportional contribution to household expenses. If you're using maybe 20% of the house, the basement apartment plus occasional access to common areas, then maybe you could contribute 20% of the household costs. Sarah was proposing that I should pay 20% of the expenses for my own house while living in the basement and having occasional access to the rest of my own property. And what would happen to the other 80% of the expenses? Marcus and I would handle those in exchange for managing the property and maintaining the business operations that generate income for everyone. The plan was now completely clear. Marcus and Sarah wanted me to move to the basement of my own house, pay them rent for the privilege, give up access to most of my own property, and allow them to operate Marcus's business throughout the main areas while they posed as the owners or managers of the property. I would be paying to be a basement tenant in my own home while they took over my life's work and accumulated wealth using my property as their base of operations. So, I said, looking at both of them carefully, your proposal is that I should move to the basement, pay you rent, give up control of my own house, and allow you to use my property for your business and social activities. Mom, you're characterizing this in the most negative possible way, Marcus said. We're offering you a way to stay in your family home with support and assistance as you age, while also allowing the property to generate income and serve productive purposes. And if I'm not interested in this arrangement? Marcus and Sarah exchanged another one of their wordless communications, and I could see them making a decision about how much truth to share. Well, Sarah said finally, if you're not interested, in a collaborative arrangement, we'd understand if you decided to sell the property and move somewhere more suitable for your needs. And you'd move out if I chose not to sell? We'd respect whatever decision you made, Marcus said, but his tone suggested that my choice was between accepting their basement arrangement or selling the house so they could continue using it under new ownership. I sat in my own living room, looking at my son and his girlfriend, trying to process the full scope of what they were proposing. They wanted me to either become a basement tenant in my own home or sell my property so they could continue their lives without the inconvenience of my ownership. After months of gradual boundary violations, false narratives, and systematic manipulation, they had finally revealed their ultimate goal: my complete displacement from my own life. But what Marcus and Sarah didn't know was that while they had been planning my future, I had been making some very interesting phone calls to some very strategic people. Phone calls that were about to change everything they thought they understood about my resources, my connections, and my willingness to be managed out of my own home. "You know what?" I said, standing up from my chair and smiling at both of them. "You're absolutely right. It is time for some changes around here." Marcus looked relieved. "I'm so glad you're being open to new arrangements, Mom." "Oh, I'm very open to new arrangements. In fact, I've already made some arrangements that I think you'll find very interesting." "What kind of arrangements?" "Well, first, about tomorrow night's dinner. You won't need to worry about me being here or not being here because you won't be living here anymore." Marcus and Sarah both looked confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean that as of next Friday, you'll need to find somewhere else to live and operate your business." "Mom, you can't just kick us out without notice." "Actually, Marcus, I can. You're not tenants with lease agreements. You're guests in my home, and I'm asking you to leave." "But what about my business? My clients? The dinner tomorrow night? You'll need to figure out alternative arrangements. I'm sure there are plenty of actual office spaces available for rent in the area." "Mom, this is crazy. You can't just destroy my business because you're upset about living arrangements." "I'm not destroying your business, Marcus. I'm reclaiming my home. Your business is your responsibility to maintain." "But where will we go?" "That's not my problem to solve. You're adults who should be capable of finding your own housing." Sarah finally found her voice. "Margaret, this seems like a very extreme reaction to what was just a conversation about future possibilities." "Sarah, this isn't a reaction to one conversation. This is a response to months of boundary violations, lies, manipulation, and increasingly outrageous demands culminating in your suggestion that I should pay rent to live in my own basement. We were just exploring options. No, you were implementing a strategy to take control of my home and my life while making me pay for the privilege. But here's what you didn't know while you were making your plans." I walked to my desk and pulled out a folder that I had been keeping ready for exactly this moment. "What's that?" "This is a purchase and sale agreement for this house, signed, sealed, and ready to close next Friday." Marcus grabbed the papers and stared at them in shock. "You sold the house?" "I sold the house." "To who?" "To Jessica Chen, for $650,000, half the market value." The silence in the room was profound. Marcus and Sarah were staring at the purchase agreement as if it were written in a foreign language. "Mom, you can't sell this house for half its value. That's financial insanity." "Actually, Marcus, I can sell my house for whatever price I choose to whoever I choose. And I chose to sell it to someone who will appreciate it and treat it with respect. But why Jessica, and why so cheap?" "Because Jessica offered to buy it with a very special leaseback arrangement. I'll be renting the entire house back from her for $500 per month for the rest of my life, with a guaranteed right to remain here as long as I want." "You're going to be Jessica's tenant?" "I'm going to be Jessica's tenant in the house I spent 26 years restoring, paying a tiny fraction of market rent to someone who actually values my presence and my contributions." "But what about my business?" "What about it? I can't just relocate everything in a week? You should have thought about that before you asked me to move to the basement of my own house." Sarah had gone completely pale. "Margaret, this will ruin Marcus's business. All of his client relationships are built around this location. Then maybe Marcus should have been more respectful of the person who was providing that location for free." "But Jessica? Really? You're going to sell the house to Marcus's ex-girlfriend?" "I'm going to sell the house to someone who treated me with kindness and respect when she was part of this family, and who I trust to honor the leaseback arrangement that will allow me to continue living here." "She's just doing this to get back at me," Marcus said, his voice rising with panic. "Jessica is using you to get revenge for our breakup." Actually, Marcus, Jessica was surprised to hear from me. But when I explained the situation and asked if she'd be interested in purchasing the house with a life estate arrangement for me, she was happy to help. You called Jessica? I called Jessica 3 weeks ago, after you first suggested I should move to the basement. We've had several very pleasant conversations about the arrangement. 3 weeks ago? Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. 3 weeks ago. Right around the time you started telling my neighbors that I was moving to assisted living and that you were my property manager. Margaret, we can work something out. We don't have to go through with this. Oh, we're definitely going through with this. In fact, Jessica is moving in on Saturday. She's very excited about living in such a beautiful historic home. Where is she going to live? In the master bedroom, obviously. It's the most beautiful room in the house, with the best bathroom and the lovely sitting area that will be perfect for her home office. Marcus was staring at me with dawning horror. You're giving Jessica my room? I'm not giving Jessica anything, Marcus. I'm selling her a house that comes with me as a tenant. She can arrange the other rooms however she likes. But what about us? Where are we supposed to go? That's not my concern, Marcus. You're adults who should be capable of finding your own housing arrangements. Mom, please, we can work this out. We'll find a different arrangement that works for everyone. The time for working things out was before you asked me to pay rent to live in my own basement. Now the arrangements have been made. I walked to the front door and opened it. You have until Friday to remove your belongings. Jessica will be here Saturday morning to begin moving in. And if we don't, then your belongings will be on the front lawn Saturday morning when she arrives. Marcus and Sarah stood in my living room for several more minutes, trying to process what had just happened. They had come into the conversation expecting to negotiate the terms of my displacement from my own home, and instead, they were being displaced themselves. Mom, this is insane. You're destroying my business out of spite. I'm not destroying anything out of spite, Marcus. I'm making a rational decision to sell my property to someone who will treat me with respect, rather than allowing it to be taken over by people who view me as an inconvenient obstacle to their ambitions. But Jessica? Really? Jessica, really. She's a lovely person who I've missed having in my life, and I'm looking forward to being her tenant rather than your basement resident. As Marcus and Sarah gathered their things and left that evening, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't experienced in months. For the first time since Marcus had moved back home, I was in complete control of my own living situation and my own future. The house sale closed the following Friday, exactly as planned. Jessica arrived Saturday morning with a moving truck and the biggest smile I'd seen from her since she and Marcus had dated. Mrs. Thompson, I can't believe you're trusting me with this beautiful house, she said as we walked through the rooms together. Jessica, I can't believe I was lucky enough to find a buyer who will let me stay here and who actually appreciates what Robert and I built. Are you sure about the rent arrangement? $500 a month seems ridiculously low. It's exactly what I want. To pay. You're giving me security and peace of mind. That's worth far more than market rent. Jessica moved into the master bedroom, just as I had promised Marcus she would. She set up her home office in the sitting area and transformed the space into a warm, welcoming environment that honored the house's history while reflecting her own personality. But the most satisfying part of the arrangement was watching Marcus try to salvage his business relationships after losing his impressive Victorian mansion office location. He had to call his major client, the one for whom he'd wanted me to disappear, and explain that he was relocating his business due to changes in his real estate situation. Several clients decided to work with other advisors rather than follow him to a generic office space in a strip mall. Sarah's real estate career also suffered when her colleagues learned that she had lost a potential $1.3 million listing because she had alienated the property owner by suggesting that a 70-year-old woman should move to assisted living to accommodate her boyfriend's business needs. But perhaps the most educational outcome was watching Marcus and Sarah's relationship deteriorate once they were forced to find their own housing and pay their own expenses without. The benefit of my subsidized lifestyle. Marcus found a small apartment that he could afford on his reduced business income. Sarah found reasons to spend less and less time there, eventually ending their engagement and moving on to a more financially promising relationship. 6 months later, Marcus called to apologize. "Mom, I know I treated you terribly. I was so focused on building my business that I lost sight of what was important." What was important, Marcus? Family, respect, gratitude for everything you did to support me. And what did I do to support you? You gave me free housing in a beautiful home, free office space for my business, and incredible patience with my increasingly unreasonable demands. And how did you repay that support? By asking you to move to the basement of your own house, so my girlfriend could take over your bedroom. Do you understand why that was unacceptable? I understand that I was asking you to sacrifice your comfort, your dignity, and your autonomy so that Sarah and I could live the lifestyle we wanted at your expense. And do you understand why I chose to sell the house to Jessica? Because she treats you with the respect and kindness that I should have been showing you all along. It was a good apology, and over time, Marcus and I rebuilt our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect rather than his assumption that he was entitled to my resources and accommodation. Jessica turned out to be the perfect homeowner and housemate. She appreciated the house's history, maintained its beautiful features, and created a living arrangement where we both had privacy and independence while enjoying each other's company. She also became the daughter I'd never had, someone who genuinely valued my opinions, enjoyed our conversations, and treated me as a respected elder rather than a burdensome dependent. Most importantly, Jessica understood that respect isn't something you negotiate or earn through manipulation. It's something you give to people because they deserve it, and something you require from others because you deserve it. Sometimes the best response to people who try to manage you out of your own life is to show them exactly who has the real power to make decisions. And sometimes the most satisfying justice is watching people who took you for granted learn exactly what they lost when they decided you weren't worth treating well. Marcus learned that lesson perfectly, and I learned that sometimes the best thing that can happen is discovering who your real family is, the people who value your presence rather than viewing it as an inconvenience to be managed. The basement is now Jessica's yoga studio, and I'm still sleeping in my own bedroom, in my own house, paying $500 a month rent to someone who actually deserves to be here. What would you have done in my situation? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story of family boundaries and justice served cold resonated with you, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more incredible stories of people who turned the tables on those who underestimated them. Because remember, it's never too late to reclaim your power. And it's never too early to demand the respect you deserve. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.